I am Tirantha Walaliyadde, a President's Counsel of the Supreme Court of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. This statement is for the attention of His Excellency the President of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, the Government and Parliament of Sri Lanka, the Secretary General of the United Nations, United Nations Human Rights Commission, the International Court of Justice, and the international community with special reference to the Sinhale and Tamil diaspora. In fact, the Sinhale community or the Sinhale public is 75% and the Tamil community is less than 15%. A minority, by reason of being a minority, does not obtain a copyright to human rights. Human rights existed long before the Charter of the United Nations or any constitution. What was entered in the Charter was a recognition of that right. The sooner the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations realized that human rights belong to every man, woman and child, the better it would be. Let us consider the Tamil diaspora. Karuna Amman, this notorious colonel of the so-called army of Prabhakaran, says this about how he joined Prabhakaran. He says that in 1983, the July of 1983, which was called Black July, the Sinhale community attacked the Tamils in Colombo and laid waste to a large number of houses, business establishments, and also lives. He says that thereafter the violence lasted for about a week, and out of fear for his life, he fled to the north. And then, on the belief that the Sinhala community was going to commit genocide on the Tamils, he joined Prabhakaran. That is the story of 90% of the Tamil diaspora. Most of the diaspora are kith and kin of the Tamils who left the country due to the violence of 1983. Their ethnic conflict starts from 1983, but the ethnic conflict began long ago. The LTTE began its murders and pillages and burnings and lootings and robberies way back in the 1970s, including the murder of Alfred Doreappa, the mayor of Jaffna. The LTTE and certain other liberation organizations of the Tamils murdered dozens of police officers who were investigating them, politicians and various other personalities in cold blood. And it continued, and the Sinhale community did nothing. They held their peace until 1983, when a truckload of commandos or truckload of army soldiers blown up in July 1983. That was the turning point, and the Sinhale community rose up in fury and laid waste to Walaliyadde and that area which was occupied mainly by the Tamil community. So the Tamil diaspora begin their story from 1983. But to us, who were there before that, long time before that, we know what happened and what the LTT and these other terrorist organizations, which Prabhakaran massacred at Pondi Bazaar in India and became the so-called leader of the Tamils. We know what they did, how many police officers they murdered, how many banks they robbed, how many houses they burnt, and how many families they destroyed. In 1983, it erupted with the murder of 13 soldiers. That is how the exodus, if you want to call it that, began. But Karunamman, Colonel Karunamman, the notorious jumper from the LTT to the government, according to his story, his cause started in 1983. He says he was a schoolboy at that time, doing the A-levels, I believe, in a leading school in Colombo. And when the violence started, he ran away to Jaffna and joined Prabhakaran's gang of thieves, shall we say. But Karunamman does not say what they did after that. The Tamil diaspora does not say what the LTTE did after that and before that. As I said, the robberies, the lootings, the murders, they don't talk about that. Karunamman gave an interview about 2 years ago to a leading news channel in Sri Lanka. And at that interview, Karunamman did not talk about the massacre of 600 police officers who laid down their arms on the directive of the then President Ranasinghe Premadasa and surrendered to the LTTE, I believe, in one of President Premadasa's attempts at some sort of peace or ceasefire, shall we say. They laid down their arms, surrendered, and that night they were murdered like animals, 600 in one night. They were put into a playground and shot, hunted and killed. Karunamman does not talk about that. The Tamil diaspora does not talk about that. Karunamman says, well, I was the Eastern Commander at that time, but I didn't know what was happening. He was Prabhakaran's closest ally. The Tamil diaspora, nor Karunamman, speak about the attack on the Sri Bodhi, the holiest of the holy Buddhist shrines, on the 14th of April, Vesak Day. when a busload of Prabhakaran's hooligans, dressed in camouflage uniforms, armed with T-56 rifles, got down at the bus stand at Anuradhapura and started shooting at random at everybody in sight. Civilians, unarmed civilians, men, women, children, Buddhist monks, Catholic nuns, and Samaneras, Dasasil Matas, they were all murdered in the morning. And when the civilians started running for their lives with children in their arms, these LTTE hooligans chased behind them like kangaroos and kept on shooting at them. They shot them on the byways, they shot them on the byroads, on the main road, in buildings and up stairwells, and they just fell. They fell where they were shot. And it took maybe 15 minutes, and the Sri Bodhi area was like the killing fields. Karunamma does not talk about that. 229 men, women and children, Buddhist monks, Samaneras and Dasasil Matas were murdered that morning. In, I believe, one of the most savage crimes known to this world. But they were people who came to worship the Sri Bodhi and people who were just coming out for their daily business. Karunamma does not talk about the Arantala murder, where so many small Samanera bhikshus were hijacked into the jungle and cut to pieces, hacked to death and shot. It doesn't talk about those things. When the interviewer at that interview asked him, kept on asking him, he said, well, I didn't approve of that. And he was Prabhakaran's closest ally, and he was the Eastern Commander at that time. Eastern Commander. The police officers were murdered in the East. The Sri Bodhi was in Anuradhapura, but all the Samaneras, all those things were covered by the Eastern province, and he was the Eastern Commander. Karunamma does not talk about they don't talk about Amritalingam, whom they shot in cold blood at the Princess Hotel. They don't talk about so many of these murders. They don't talk about anything other than genocide by the Sri Lanka army and the atrocities committed by the Sinhale people on them. The Human Rights Commission of the United Nations would do well to keep these things in mind before they pass resolutions on the army, the Sri Lankan army, for genocide. I think the United Nations Human Rights Commission to do well to remember that during the last days of the war, or I wouldn't call it a war, shall we say the conflict, when Prabhakaran and his gang of hooligans were surrounded by the army at the lagoon, Prabhakaran used the Tamil civilians as the human shield and hid behind them and let them face the guns of the Sri Lankan army. And the army, it is on record that the army soldiers waded across the lagoon and brought so many children, men, women, back onto the army side of the war and into safety. There are videos of soldiers, Sri Lankan army soldiers, carrying babies in their arms and wading across the lagoon back to the safe side. This is the Prabhakaran, and this is the LTTE with the Tamil diaspora commemorates his birthdays, his anniversaries, etc., 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 who had no regard for human life. They don't talk about the massacres that they did in the east at Seruvilla, where they murdered, where they attacked villages, Sinhale villages, and killed men, women and children. Pregnant women were cut in half. And finally, when it became impossible, the Sinhala people who have been living there for generations in those areas in the east left and went to find refuge in safer areas. But the United Nations Human Rights Commission seems to be willfully blind to all these matters when they go for indictments. And when they go for charges of genocide against members of the Sri Lankan armed forces with some, shall we say, embroidery. In their resolutions, they say that human rights violations on both sides should be investigated. But the resolutions are always against the Sri Lanka army and the Sinhala people of this country on allegations of genocide, brutality and murder. So maybe it is time the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations took into account these matters before they pass their next resolution. The number of civilians that Prabhakaran and his gang murdered, I would say legion.